All right, let's get going. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Danny Nelms. I'm the CEO at Work Institute. Uh, my background is also HR for any of you that did not know that, but I've been with Work Institute almost 15 years come May. So excited to be with you today. Obviously, this is a webcast series, so this is the fourth of our series. This one is aimed a little more towards executive leaders, but they're all relevant. We've been trying to do this a little bit different than maybe some traditional quote webinars, trying to make this a little more podcast slash conversational, just a little bit more laid back. So hope a lot of folks have said they've really enjoyed it. Some of you were here last week, was pleased to be joined by Kevin Ritchie, who I thought had some really, really good points to offer up. And we've got a couple more guest hosts coming up, or guest speakers coming up. So hopefully you'll enjoy those as well. But let's get started. So I think one of the most critical topics in today's workplace issues are our managers. And we're going to talk about some of the data, and then we're really going to get into kind of talking about how how managers influence retention. Talk about how we need to invest in our managers, talk about the evolving role, all of that we're going to talk about. Again, trying to keep this to about 30 minutes or so. Everybody's busy. They got lots on their plate, lots to do. So I think it's important for everybody to be learning, gaining some different perspectives, but not trying to spend all day on webinars and other things. So let's jump in. So obviously, one of the big things that's concerning us right now is the fact that in our 2024 data, which is in our 2025 retention report, we're again seeing an increase in people leaving specifically as the root cause because of their manager. So going back to 2020, we had about 7% of all people who would cite their manager and sub themes around their manager is the reason they left. We're up to 9.7%. So this is an alarming trend. Obviously, you may look back and say, well, that's only 10%. I've got some more to that story I want to share in just a couple of minutes. But, again, I think there are two narratives that we typically hear when we talk about why people leave. And if you want to really know the truth, then I invite you to download our retention report. It's complimentary. Just go to our website, go to the resources tab. There is a selection there called retention reports, and all of our retention reports since 2017 are available there. Obviously, the first narrative we always hear is people leave for money. And I think if you go and find almost all of our retention reports since 2017, would indicate that that's simply not true. In fact, career reasons are the number one reason why people leave. But the second narrative we typically hear is that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And I always talk about that being kind of a half truth, and I'm going to show you why I think that. But one of the big issues right now is that, we also did some survey of HR leaders. Only 26% of HR executives believe their managers are effective at retention. And so, again, this increase in managers being cited as the reason is troubling because of just employees rely on their manager. The manager is the conduit, if you will, to the organization, and that number is on the rise. But when we look a little bit deeper, what we find is that we have 11 categories for leaving, and 6 of those categories, career issues, environment or culture issues, health and family reasons, management reasons, obviously, work-life balance and job, are all correlated to manager effectiveness or manager ratings. So as those manager reasons for leaving are going up, it's very likely that if we're measuring it in our organization through like an annual survey, stay interviews, those type of things, we're probably seeing ratings of our managers going down, and that's affecting overall retention. So when we talk about managers being the linchpin, this is really what we're getting at, is that managers affect career reasons, right? Most of our managers are not very good at being career coaches, for example. They're not very good at really helping employees figure out their path in the organization, whether that be up the ladder or across the lattice, as we talked about last week. The culture itself, we find that managers aren't always good stewards of the culture. I'm sure all of you, I've certainly seen it many times, is that, you've got managers who are talking to their employees and it's all about, well, they did this, they did that. And they're sort of talking about the C-suite or the executive team or senior managers. And so they're not good stewards of the culture. They're not taking accountability. Health and family reasons are going up, and health and family and work-life balance have some connections that we're still sort of sorting out to some degree. Those issues are on the rise. We know that managers impact those as well. Certainly work-life balance with hybrid work, just the need for flexible schedules. The good thing is the job reasons are going down to some degree from a height during the Great Resignation. But again, managers in fact impact all of these reasons for leaving. And I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think this is somewhere around 55% of all the reasons for leaving in terms of being impacted by the manager. Now, again, it's important to say people aren't just leaving their managers. Typically, when we think about a person leaving their manager, we think their manager's a jerk, for lack of a better word. But it's all the things that a manager can influence. It's all the communication that comes from manager, all of the interactivity, all the mentoring, coaching, all of those things that are supposed to flow through our manager often are not happening. And that's where we got to focus so much of attention. We have to look at this manager as truly the linchpin. One of the really concerning things that we've seen is we look at sub themes. Okay, we've got managers at as a category for leaving, and then we look at sub themes. They can be things like communication, knowledge and skills, lack of support. But this whole issue of professional behavior, okay, this is how you communicate. Just showing up as a professional manager, we're seeing these reasons rocket, right? So they've doubled since 2022. So our managers, and I chalk up a lot of this to the fact that our managers are stressed out, they're burned out. We're going to talk in just a minute about how much we've added to the role of the manager. So this is critical. I mean, I think we are at a critical inflection point as workplaces, as employers, in how are we going to shore up our managers? How are we going to help them? How are we going to develop them? How are we going to actually hold them accountable? Because again, they play such a critical role, and yet I think they feel like, the forgotten person in so many organizations. And by the way, I think we've had a little bit of trouble whether chat or Q&A works best, but I invite you to ask questions, throw out a comment through either the chat or the Q&A. I'll either be happy to try and respond to your questions or certainly read out your comments as we go along. The other thing that we certainly track as an organization, and this goes back to me talking about how manager effectiveness is actually impacting those 6 categories, is we look at the overall rating of managers, right? This is through our exit interviews. When someone leaves, we're not just asking them why they left, but we're asking about how they rated the company as an employer. We're asking how they rated the job. We're asking about how they feel about the team or the people that they work with. And we're also asking about their manager. And again, since 2020, we've started to see these numbers on the decline. Now, one of the interesting things is in 2020, of course, we all remember as the pandemic year, manager ratings actually went up. You can see they actually climbed during that year. And one of the things that we saw in our data was the fact that managers were seen as being more available, managers were seen as being more effective communicators, and managers were also setting clear expectations for their team members. Those are three really critical things. And I think part of what's happened is if we continue to give more and more to our managers, I think those three critical factors have started to fall off, and they just simply don't have enough time. They don't have the direction. They don't have the accountability to make sure that they're doing those three things, that they're available, they're communicating, and they're setting clear expectations. So this is something I think fundamentally that we've got to keep focused on, those three things, among others, obviously, but are our managers communicating effectively? Are they setting clear expectations? And are they being held accountable for that? So this is where I want to really dig in for a few minutes, and I've got quite a few stats that I want to throw at you. But first, we want to talk about just like how is the role of the manager evolving? And I started doing a bunch of research, obviously, over the last week or so. And this is some of the information I found from organizations like McKinsey and Gallup and others. In a list, it kind of goes like this. Obviously, there's increased span of control, growing administrative burdens, hybrid work, obviously, for a lot of managers. We've got AI getting thrown into the mix, and they're expected to lead and coach to drive well-being and engagement of their employees. In fact, Gallup's actually cited that 64% of employees have been given more responsibilities over the last 2 or 3 years. 51% have restructured their teams, and 42% have actually got budget constraints or budget cuts. So what this is telling us is that managers now have more work to do, with their employees having more work to do. They've got tighter budgets to work with, and they're actually managing different people. So this is leading us to some significant challenges. And according to McKinsey, only about the third of the time that a manager actually is working are they spending on talent and people issues. So all of these things are going on. And when I think of a manager, I think of you want their number one responsibility to be managing their people, managing their function, right? And yet we keep loading them up with more and more administrative duties. We keep loading them up with certain strategic things. All of those just keep adding up to the point where only a third of the time they're actually spending on the most important asset that exists in an organization, and that is their people. Span of controls are expanding, so they've got more people that they're trying to manage. This is a challenge. It really is. And I think we've got to take a step back. I think we've got to look at the role of the manager. I think we have to understand what we're asking our managers to do, and really study it hard and make sure that we haven't, the pendulum may have just swung too far. I know it's easy to do. I know, things are moving so fast in organizations. The environment has changed so dramatically over the last 3 to 5 years. Sometimes that pendulum just swings too far, and we got to be mindful of that, and we got to step back. We got to really take note of it, and we got to see if we need to swing that pendulum back the other way just a little bit. One of the things that's also challenging, and we've talked about this a lot over the last couple of years, is this emerging workforce, right? Employees' expectations are emerging. They're different. The expectations are growing. I think we all have felt that, right? We think about it in sort of 8 different areas, and I'm not going to get into detail, but employees are requiring more flexibility. They want a work-life integration, not just work-life balance, work-life integration. They want a job that fits their skills and plays to their strengths. They want to be first. They want the culture to be focused on employees. They do have concern for family. The family dynamics with childcare, with elder care, mental health issues, all of that is playing into how are we taking care of the well-being of our employees, all that. Then they want autonomy to do the job. They want to work with the people they work with. And oh, by the way, let's make sure we're giving them purpose and connecting them to the purpose of our job. Now, I say that kind of flippantly because I think that's the way we all feel, but it is the reality. This is the reality of today's workforce. These are the expectations, and it's not going away. This has been building for a long time. I think we sometimes feel like this is all an outcome of the pandemic. I would tell you that this was starting to build prior to the pandemic. The pandemic just sped a lot of things up. But this has been going on for the last 3 to 5 years. So we are now and a lot of that has to do with we just got a younger workforce, right? The baby boomers are really starting to completely exit the workforce. So we got a very different makeup in our workforce. And I don't like to get lost in generational titles. I think we do a disservice when we do that. Because in a sense, we're stereotyping people based on simply a generational title. But we have more and more folks that are in that early to middle career stage that simply experienced a very different life than baby boomers and Gen X. So we have to understand that. We have to know that. But let's not get lost in simply trying to label them a certain way, because that's not going to help us. Because more times than not, we see that as excuse making as opposed to how are we really building a workforce that is tailored around the preferences, expectations, and intents of the workforce that we have today. And oh, by the way, all you have to do is look back through. I saw this not too long ago. Our founder, Dr. Tom Mahan, uses this a lot. You can go back to the early 1900s and you can look at newspaper clippings, and all we've done every 8 to 10 years, 15 years, it's always this is the worst workforce ever. They expect more than they ever have. This has been going on for 100 years. And so it's going to keep going on because we all grow up with different environments. We all grow up with different technology. All of those things are shaping who we are as people, but also who we are as employees. And so we've got to take note of that. We've got to understand it. So we have an emerging workforce that's going on. And I would argue that I'm not sure companies are really investing in their managers. Again, I went back and did some research about, according to the ATD, the Association for Training and Development, 50 to 60% of new managers, people that are taking on manager responsibilities for the first time, have no formal training. So half the managers that we're promoting into manager roles receive no training, no development. We're expecting them to take on this big new job. We're probably giving them more money. We're certainly giving them more responsibilities, and we're kind of going, have at it. Do well, do great. But are we helping them to achieve their objectives? Are we helping ourselves to achieve our objectives? Because in many cases, we're simply not preparing them for what's to come. And the manager job is hard. It is a very, very difficult thing to manage people. I'll bet everybody on this call, for the most part, is either currently managing a team or has to manage a team. It is very, very difficult to manage others. And so we're throwing our managers to the wolves in a lot of cases. And 75% of organizations don't think that their development programs are actually effective. Really? I mean, so we're looking at ourselves, we're saying we're not training our new managers. 75% of our organizations say, yeah, even what we're doing is not effective. We actually, again, going back to our survey, 62% of leaders said that they would be expanding training and development for managers. Will they? I think this is something almost every time at the beginning of the year, we have all these good intentions that we're going to do things for our managers. We're going to train them. We're going to develop them. And all of a sudden we look at, we get to September and we look back and we haven't done it. We haven't put those things in place. So I would argue that the manager job is getting more and more difficult. The role is expanding. The responsibilities are greater. They've got a different challenge with an emerging workforce, and we're not helping them because we're not investing in them to help them to develop in their roles. And yet managers are the linchpin. This is where the rubber meets the road in terms of retention, in terms of employee engagement. The managers are the key. Uh, we can have all the best mission, vision, and values. We can have charismatic leaders in the C-suite. We can be doing something really cool from a product perspective, whatever we're selling or whatever we're doing. But at the end of the day, if our managers are not effective, it's very likely that our organization is not going to be effective. Again, I want to invite your questions or your comments, throw them out there. Let me just make sure I haven't missed any. Got it. So a few things obviously that I think we need to be doing is obviously we need to be developing our managers. One of the things that is critical and what we learn from an efficacy standpoint is that managers tend to they learn from each other. One of the principles we have in our leadership development programs that we offer is two things. One, we talk about it as being facilitated learning, meaning there is so much knowledge in the room. How do we facilitate that knowledge being shared with each other? And two things make that important. Number one, it's a good way to learn. But number two, we also hear a lot of times that managers don't feel like the training that they're receiving is actually relevant to them. Whether that's a manufacturing frontline supervisor that's being trained by some fancy consulting company, and so they just feel like they're being talked at, not talked to. Whether it just feels like they're in a classroom somewhere where someone's just getting up and basically doing a lecture. And that's not to say that, they enjoy, mock this or getting up in front of the room, but participating in the process, making sure that it's facilitated, making sure that the topics are on point, right? And going back to this whole idea of the emerging workforce, are we helping them to coach, to be career coaches? Are we helping them to facilitate those conversations? Are they truly understand what we expect from a culture experience in our company, right? I've said many times, I think if we were to get 15 or 20 employees, or excuse me, managers in a room and say, well, let's talk about our culture. First of all, the room might be silent, but secondly, how many different variations of what we expect in our culture are we going to get? Now, I understand culture is sometimes an overused word. I think it's a catch-all term, but the big thing about culture is, what are our norms? What are the things that we truly believe in? How do we treat each other? How do we talk to each other? What is it that we expect in our organization? So that is a big part of that manager role, is how do they help build the culture? Really quick, we've got a comment. It requires organization and leaders of these organizations to shift the paradigm of thinking and overall approach, shifting to a mindset of managing processes and leading people. I like that. Most approach the day in the exact opposite way, approaching it as managing people and leading processes or initiatives. If we adopt a leading people approach, our conversations, expectation setting, levels of accountability, and overall interactions take on a totally different context and foundation. Ronald, thank you so much for that comment. I think you're dead on. The whole concept of leading people, right? That we have to put the leading people component first and foremost. So I talked about the fact that we got to help them to be good career coaches. Also, how do we deal with this work-life balance, hybrid work? It's something new. I shouldn't say it's something new, but now it's such a part of most managers' responsibility. So are we helping them to navigate the challenges that come with, not everybody's good at working from home. Not all jobs are appropriate for working in a hybrid environment. Some people, and communication is maybe more difficult, maybe it's not. The interesting thing about the pandemic era was, again, managers were seen as more available, even though we weren't in the office or workplace for most of the time. So employees felt more connected. I don't know whether we were just doing more Zoom meetings or whether there were more one-on-ones, but they certainly felt more connected to their manager during that time period. So I think we have to get back to that, but we have to understand some of those challenges of the hybrid role. So culture, coaching, the hybrid issues that are going on, those are some of the key things that we've got to do. And kind of lastly, and this is the tough part, because it's going to sound like we need to care for them, and then we sort of have to bring the hammer. But accountability is so critical. We know that in all of our organizations, whether again it's setting clear expectations for our employees. Employees want that. They want to know clearly what it is expected of them and what they're supposed to do. Now, they want to have some autonomy in that. They want to be able to do it to some degree the way they want to do it. And we have to lean into that. We have to play to people's strengths. But at the same time, from a manager perspective, we have to hold them accountable. We have to hold them accountable to retention. We have to hold them accountable to engagement. How are we going to do that? How are we going to be measuring that? And I think to some degree we're getting a little bit lost in our survey world right now. Everything from over surveying to trying to get a little bit too fancy about it. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. It doesn't need to be difficult. We need to have a continuous listening process that we feel comfortable with, that we feel confident in. But then we need to be giving that information back to our managers so they understand where they are. And that's a lot of times what we're seeing is that we're collecting all this data from employees, but then the managers never see it. They don't understand what's going on. We could be helping them because we could be giving them additional information and additional data. So again, I wanted to just wrap this up in about 30 minutes or so. Again, it's such a critical time. The role of the manager is absolutely evolving. I think a huge takeaway from this needs to be, do we go back and reevaluate our managers? Do we reevaluate span of control? Do we reevaluate those responsibilities? Do we look at their entire team? We've got to be doing that right now. We've got to be helping them from a development standpoint. We do have an emerging workforce. Those new responsibilities are real. How are we training them? How are we developing? Oh, by the way, one of the things I meant to mention, I apologize, is that it also needs to be ongoing learning. We suggest a minimum of a quarterly learning event for every manager in the organization. It's got to be a continuous learning. It's not a single event a year. It's not just some online thing. We need to be investing in putting our managers in a room as much as possible, at least virtually, and giving them opportunities to learn from each other on a continuous basis. And we would suggest at least quarterly. And again, we got to be holding them accountable to outcomes. All right. So hopefully this was helpful. I hope I spurred a little bit of thought. Our next webcast is next week. We're going to talk about the predicted value of exit and stay interviews. Again, I encourage you to go download our 2025 retention report. I think you're going to find a lot of interesting information there. And our team will certainly probably be following up to let you know how to do that. So thanks everybody for joining this morning. Appreciate it. Everybody have a great rest of the week.